Hi, I'm Nick White. I'm a clinical psychologist working for Fareham and Gosport CAMHS. As a parent or as a carer, our children and young people will test boundaries. It's a natural part of a young person's development and helps them to form their identity and the values that are important to them. However, at times, those behaviours can present challenges and can present limits to that young person. And thinking with them about the boundaries that you might have as a household or in the communities that they're in can be extremely important. Boundaries can be very broad-reaching, and they may mean boundaries around behaviour at home, how you expect a young person to behave when they're in the household. However, boundaries could also be about ways of educating a young person as to the expectations that may be helpful for them in the future when they are in their peer group and in their wider community. For example, the boundaries that may be helpful for them in keeping themselves safe. There are a number of helpful principles that can be a good place to start when you're thinking about the boundaries that you might want to set in the life of a young person. The first step is to establish clear rules and the consequences for what happens if those rules are broken. It can be very helpful to develop a written contract, and that may seem somewhat surprising, but it can be very useful so it's clear to all parties involved about what the rules are and about what happens if the rules are broken. It could be something that you put on the fridge, it could be something that you save on a phone, you could screenshot it, it could be something that could be stored wherever works for you and the young person. But having it in a clear and unambiguous way can be incredibly helpful as a first step. Secondly, share responsibility with the young person for deciding what the boundaries would be. It can be incredibly helpful to have an upfront and honest discussion with the young person about what the boundaries might be in a certain situation. Be prepared to listen to them strongly advocating for their point, arguing with you that their way of looking at things is the best. However, over time, an honest and frank discussion will enable a shared understanding of boundaries to be formed. It can be incredibly important for the young person to start to develop the independence to develop their own boundaries, and this kind of dialogue can be an excellent starting point. Thirdly, it's important to stick to the rules and back each other up as a family. It's highly likely that if a rule is in place, a boundary is in place, that it may be tested. At times it could be a small test, at other times it could be a grand gesture. The young person may find themselves really pushing against the boundaries that you've agreed, testing the extent to which you're willing to follow those rules. Within reason, it's incredibly important to listen to that concern, to talk through with the young person about what their distress or their frustration may be about a rule. But it's also important to feel that you have backup, so that you feel that the family as a whole have signed up to the rules that have been agreed to, and that when you are tested, it's not you alone being tested, that you've got the resources there to feel that you can maintain a strong stance on the rule that you've been provided with. It's unlikely to be easy, but over time, the more consistent you are in setting those rules and maintaining those rules, the more effective they'll be. Fourthly, give positive messages. It can feel at times as a carer, as a loved one, as a young person, that having to put into place rules is incredibly unfair. And as a young person, throughout their development, they are constantly fighting battles each day to understand themselves, understand what's required of them. So actually reminding them on a regular basis of their strengths, of their positive qualities and of what they have to offer is also a good way of complementing what's taking place in terms of setting those clear boundaries. Giving them messages that you love them, giving them messages that you admire what they're doing, what they're achieving, and remembering that actually they're never really too old to have a hug can be a really good starting point in reinforcing the positive elements of having clear rules in your household or in your community. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, but maybe perhaps the most difficult at times, is leading by example. Children and young people are very rarely going to respond positively with the idea of, you need to do this because I tell you to. They may be much more likely to follow an example that's being modelled for them, to help them understand the consequences of their actions and understand the way in which we'd like them to be behaving. It's much more effective to show them what we want to see rather than what we don't want them to see. And that modelling can then be a helpful way of giving them the foundations to make changes in their own behaviour. So in general, the key message when setting boundaries is it needs to tune in to the values of you as a family, as a carer, as a community, and to the young person's values. So spend some time before setting rules and boundaries thinking about what's going to be most important in terms of the life of the young person and what's going to lead them to develop the kind of reactions and responses that are going to be most helpful in their development and taking them forward to where they want to be and where you would hope them to be.